gentlemen, welcome to another week. The world is on fire. Are we still doing COVID? I don't know if we're doing COVID. We're doing all kinds of crazy rioting and police brutality and Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all this. Let's get on with the show. Viking Coffee. Evan Armstrong's coffee out of Bowling Green, Ohio. The guy is just killing it. He just sent me some Costa Rican bread. What the hell am I saying? Costa Rican blend, as well as a bag of Old Man Strength. And he also sent me a small sample of the Tanzanian blend, it's fantastic. The Colombian and that Tanzanian blend are fantastic. Give him a holler at VikingCoffeeCo.com. Use the code VikingCoffee10 at checkout. Cerberus has everything you're going to need when all the competitions start, and they are going to start. They can't keep us down forever. You will be lifting again in public. Cerberus, give them a holler. Cerberus-strength.us. If you need belts, wraps, straps, chalk, smelling salts, sandbags, nose torque, tacky, you've got everything. Give them a holler and use the code refined savage 10 at checkout. I got to slow down. I'm just fucking this whole thing up. Warrior CBD. Just got a nice brand new bottle of the sublingual drops. I love them. They help me sleep. Restful sleep. They're just the best. They just relax you, calm you down. If you have aches and pains, you have problems sleeping, you have anxiety, you have a whacked out dog, Warrior CBD is the answer. Check them out at warriorcbdofficial.com. Use the code WARRIOR20 off at checkout. Serious Steel. Serious Steel has everything you guys are going to need once your gyms are open. We're opened up here in Ohio, and Serious Steel is going to help you get your place up and running smoothly. SeriousSteel.com if you need anything from bars to plates, hell, anything you need to outfit your home gym or your commercial gym, your CrossFit gym, or if you just need a new set of knee sleeves, give them a holler. SeriousSteel.com, use the code SAVAGE at checkout. There is no meat shortage. Don't let them fool you. But don't buy their meat anymore either. Go to these small batch farms, like a place like Stay Classy Meats. Stay Classy Meats, small batch farming out of Bozeman, Montana. They will send boxes directly to your home in freezered up cooler boxes. I get my meat from Stay Classy. It's the best. When that 35-pound meat box shows up at my house, I am always so psyched for it to show up. It's the best meat in the world. Their bison is just out of the control. But I love all their meats. It's all good stuff. Go check them out at stayclassymeats.com. Use the code SAVAGE at checkout for 10% off. Now, finally, the breath belt. We are using the breath belt all over the place at Blind Dog. I'm using it. I used it to deadlift the other day and had the breath belt and a power belt on. Hayden used the breath belt this morning to do his squats in, but we're using it for all kinds of athletic activities. People with back problems, the breath belt is the key. Check them out at thebreathbelt.com. Use the code SAVAGE20 at checkout. All caps, SAVAGE20 at checkout. Now, today on the show, we have, I can't really use his last name. The guy has been around the world. He's done some crazy shit, and we're going to respect his privacy. Raise his first name. He was a Army Special Forces. That's Green Berets for those of you who do not habla. World War in 83 to 89. So he was out there kicking butt and taking Soviet names and doing his thing. So I want you to sit back, enjoy the show, and we'll see you at the end. So Ray, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
You were saying that you didn't think what you did, or not what you did, but that the how relevant it would be. But I think, especially today, I don't know if people understand that 1983, 1989 time frame in what was going on in the world. And you mentioned the Soviet Union to kids today, and they look at you like you've got three heads.
Yes.
I had to give my son a history lesson on it.
It's definitely a different world. Back then there was always that fear that hanging over your shoulder, will they go into Europe? it was a big. There was no internet, there was no social media, not like it is today, and so there was a big feeling of us and them, and their lifestyle and who they were so alien to us.
Sure.
That they were just like monsters in the shadows. You know what I mean? And as a kid growing up, and now the way the world is so connected with all these little videos you can see, they're actually humanized by all that stuff. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's a little bit harder to have that mindset of us versus them. Another thing about the Cold War that I don't know if you remember, nuclear war was a real possibility
Sure.
back then. And in first grade, actually, which would have been, I was born in '64, so however you are, 72 maybe in first grade, 6 years old. We did in first grade in Catholic school in Elyria, I did duck and cover.
Under your desk,
Yep,
right?
I still remember doing that. It was probably the tail end of it,
Yeah.
but we did, they were planning for.
Well, in '64 was, that was, you were born in '64, but if you, what did you say, like 70, 71?
71 or 2, however old you are in first grade, you know,
So you're still at the end of the Vietnam War, they're still freaking out over that.
Right, yeah. I do remember a lot of guys. I remember seeing Vietnam on TV, you know, and not knowing what it was.
Right,
you know.
yeah.
And my dad actually, he was in the Air Force. He worked on heavy equipment. He was stationed in Taiwan, and he worked on heavy equipment that serviced the aircraft that were actually cycling in and out of Nam at that time. So
yeah, I know. Even growing up in the '80s, our vision of Vietnam was Rambo. That's where you first heard that.
Yeah.
And that became like the. Although I'm guessing that those movies sent more guys into the military than just about anything. It was good PR. You thought you were going to go there and.
Well, when you mentioned that, the movie that got me interested in the military was called A Bridge Too Far. Have you ever seen that movie?
I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
Well, it was about an operation towards the end of World War II, and it was all about paratroopers.
Okay.
And I went to see that movie, and I was just really enamored with what those guys did, and they did some, even though they lost, ultimately they ended up losing that battle or that operation. They did some really honorable things, and that's what really, I said to myself, man, I really want to do that. I want to jump out of airplanes and be one of those guys.
So I was going to say, what got you, your father was in the Air Force. How did you decide?
We didn't talk about his military service that much. It wasn't an issue.
It was weird back then, right? Guys didn't talk at all about it.
No. He told me, he said I was in the Air Force, and I was young, I didn't know what that really meant,
Yeah.
So it wasn't like that was a thing in my family to go serve. I saw that movie and was really really interested with that type of service.
Right.
Yeah, I thought, again, those guys did some really honorable things. I always thought what they did was just and right and honorable, and I wanted to be one of those guys. They seemed like they were different, special, elite, whatever you want to call it. And so I didn't do very well in high school, and I didn't have a lot of options at the end of high school.
Were you local?
Yeah, Elyria High School.
Okay.
And so I wasn't going into college, and again, I was thinking about the military. It was kind of like really my last option.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about Army Special Forces. I didn't know anything about Rangers. I didn't know anything about it. All I knew is I wanted to jump out of airplanes.
Right.
And so I took the written test, which was called the ASVAB, and they score you, and then they give you options. Back then they were trying to build up the military. It was the Reagan years, and they give you options based on your scores. And the guy said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to jump out of airplanes." And he said, "Oh, well, would you rather be Special Forces or Rangers?" And I said, "I don't have any idea what either of those are."
Right.
And he said, "Well, I think you want to be Special Forces." This is what the guy told me. Now, ultimately, knowing what Rangers do and how disciplined and everything they are, Special Forces was the better option for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was. I don't think I would have done well in the Marine Corps or the Rangers or anything, because it's kind of a relaxed environment in SF. They're adults and they expect. They normally didn't take privates off the street, and that's what they were doing. They were kind of building it up at that point.
Right.
So it was just a more relaxed atmosphere, as relaxed as you could be in special ops. In fact, we didn't salute major and below in the company area, which was kind of a abnormality. But again, as far as the military is concerned, but they really expected everyone. The focus was on knowing your job and being team oriented, and not letting your buddies down. So that guy did me a favor, and I didn't even know it.
And that's usually not the story that people say about recruiters is,
right.
Oh yeah, special forces, we'll put you in there.
Well, this guy wasn't a recruiter. He was at, you go take your physical, and I forget what it's called, but there's a name for it, but it's in downtown Cleveland. And it's an in-processing, kind of your basic in-processing center. Yeah. And I took my physical, and that's where he said, well, what would you like to be?
Yeah.
And this was just some random dude sitting behind a computer. And he hooked me up, and I didn't even know it at the time.
Yeah, I talked to a guy who was a SEAL at one point, and he said the scariest thing for him when that all happened was, if I screw up in BUDS, I have to go back to the fleet. It's a whole different world. So at least with the Army, you could go back to being infantry or something like that. You're not swabbing decks on a ship in the middle of the ocean.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because I listened to that interview.
Yeah.
And I'll echo that same concern, because the instructors always used to tell us, if you screw this up, you're going to do the duffel bag drag back to the Amos and Andy division, which is what they called the 82nd Airborne.
Right.
Their patch has 2 A's in it, and they called them, which, those guys are great. They're airborne infantry. They're really super guys. But I didn't want to go to regular infantry. I didn't want to be regular airborne infantry. When I figured out what I had gotten involved in, it was for me it was kind of like your SEAL buddy there. It was like do or die, and I did not want to go to a regular infantry unit. They call them legs. Airborne guys call regular infantry legs, and that's not to say that those guys are bad at all.
No,
but,
I get it. Yeah,
you want to be where you want to be, and so
Is that when you're going through the training and it gets to the point where it's brutal and you're hurting really bad and guys are quitting? I mean, is that the in your opinion the thing that gets you through, is the fact that you don't want to go anywhere else? This is what you want to do.
For me, it was.
Yeah.
Because if I failed in the military, I did so poorly in high school that. That was my one chance to get back on track.
Yeah.
And I thought, it's all or nothing for me. So for me, yes, that was what kept me going. I do not want to go back to a regular unit.
It always reminds me of that cheesy movie in the 80s, that Officer and the Gentleman, where he's Louis Gossett Jr. is trying to get Warren Beatty to quit. He screams out, "I've got nowhere else to go.
Right.
Why are you still here?"
Well, in my head, that's what it was.
Yeah, right.
And a lot of times, I know when we talked on the phone, you said, well, you guys are extreme athletes, and there were a lot of guys that were athletes, but it was a certain type of mindset. Mm-hmm. I saw some guys that were rail thin with maybe, 12% body fat, skinny little guys that made it through. And I saw guys who were football players and other athletes that couldn't cut the mustard. And so it was a mental thing rather than a physical thing. These guys were really good at what they did. And again, nothing against them, but they just didn't want it, I guess, bad enough.
Yeah, and that is the most, I talk to athletes all the time. Very high level. We've had the best discus thrower in the country in here, and the best hammer thrower, and all these fantastic. We've had Olympians, but my thing with you guys who've done special forces and SEALs and these guys is that mindset that how am I going to get through this? I'm never going to quit. I'm just going to keep going, mm-hmm. and I'm not because when I was an athlete, I was in a professional sport where all the guys were 6'4" and 320 pounds, and I was 5'11", and the only thing that I could do was just work harder than they did, and that's mm-hmm. all we had in common was time. So I was going to put more time in, and whether it was a smart move or not, I was just going to beat the crap out of myself because I wanted to be those good guys, and I was mm-hmm. never going to gain 6 more inches of height. And that's what interests me, is that mindset and how people get through that. And
for me, it was just stubbornness. But when you say that, that's how I made it through every step of special forces was just being, putting in the work. I got to do this. I have to do it. There is no option. Failure is not an option,
Right.
I guess, for, I don't know whoever said that, but just keep pushing, And I saw when guys gave up. When Special Forces back then was divided into 3 phases. And the first phase was kind of the weeding out phase from a physical standpoint. And I think I listened to a number of your podcasts. I find them really interesting.
Thank you.
And I listened to the Task Force 160 guy.
Yeah.
Great respect for those guys.
He's coming back on next week.
Yeah, really. A bunch of awesome guys, legendary among the the SF guys that I worked at. I was always Task Force 160. I'm sorry. And then I listened to your Marine buddy, and he mentioned how they ran these guys, ran them on a real tough run and brought them back into and then just ran them again. Well, they did that to us in McCall, and I remember one of the guys came from Ranger Battalion, was going through Special Forces with us, and he lost control of his bowels on one of those runs, and that he wasn't giving up, you know what I mean? And that's the kind of guy that I'm like, holy smokes, man. And he said, I'm sorry. He stepped out of line, had his little issue, and then stepped back into line at the back of the line and kept going. And so they ran us to death, because those guys were gazelles,
Right.
And we ran outside the gate, and they ran us for however long they ran us. I couldn't tell you, it's been so long. Ran us back in. They gave us the command for quick time, which means it's a march. You change from running to marching, and had the platoon do a right face. And he said, "Okay, gentlemen, great job. Left face and double time march." And we did that run again. It was a shorter run, but it was just as fast. And I saw a lot of guys looking around saying, "What the heck's going on here?" And they did it to us a third time, and that's when we lost a couple guys, and I could see them give up, and when they did it to us the third time, I said, okay, I may fall out of this run, but I ain't quitting, and that's they're looking for those guys, be they athletes, or I'm just a regular guy, I'm just a little bit more stubborn than most, maybe, And
that's probably the reason why I would assume they did it. They were going to keep doing it until they had a couple people quit.
Mm-hmm.
Who was weak.
Right, that's that weeding process, and Camp McCall was definitely, they had three skills that they taught in Camp McCall: dismounted patrolling, land navigation, and survival.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a really big class, because they were trying to pump up numbers in SF at that time, and a lot of guys fresh off the street, like me. And so they broke the class into 3 separate groups, and we started going through each one of those things, kind of a round robin thing. When you completed one, you switched up. You know? And I was on survival, which was a week-long experience, and they truck you out to they truck you out to a grid square and drop you off. You're by yourself. They give you a live animal, either a chicken or a rabbit.
Okay.
No other food. And I remember they gave me a matchbook to start my fires. My matchbook had a picture of a steak dinner on it, and that was done on purpose.
Sure, right, yeah.
And it wasn't like they just dropped you off out there. You had, I want to say it was 36, 40 tasks that you had to complete. So you were busy the whole time. You had to build a lean-to shelter with a firewall. Mm-hmm. You had to keep your fire going. You had to, find a covered area to put your firewood. You had to make a signaling device for aircraft, like a brush fire in the shape of a letter or something like that. You had to make a bunch of snares and traps, and there was you had to keep a log of when you left your campsite, where you were going, when your expected return was, and you weren't allowed to use that paper from that logbook to start your fire.
Right.
So you had all these tasks that you had to do, but they didn't feed us the day that they dropped us off, and all you had for that week was that chicken. And we were out there for 2 or 3 days, and it was winter in North Carolina, which is not like here. It's mostly rain and wet, and we had a real bad rainstorm. Luckily, I did a good job on my lean-to, and my fire was going, so I was good to go. But still, it was cold and wet and miserable. And they said if you ever get into trouble out there, they gave us these parachute flares. It's like a little tube, mm-hmm. and you can take the cap off and put it on the other end and slap the cap, and there's a firing pin in the cap, and it launches a flare up, and then they'll come out and get you. Well, you're quitting when you do that. So the storm passes through, and it's a moonlit night, and it's cold and wet and rainy, and a flare goes up. and I'm like, uh-oh, somebody's pulling the pin, And once that flare went up, once one guy did it, it started, there was another one, and then another
Fireworks
one.
display.
Right. And there were guys just right on the edge there that all they needed was to, see somebody else pull the pin. And they got rid of them. We never saw those guys.
Right.
They would get them and get them out. If anyone quit in formation, they would grab them and get them out of there because it can spread rapidly, So.
That's interesting. Yeah, I can't remember the gentleman's name, and I'll have to look him up afterwards because I'm pretty sure he was in the same time you were, and he had talked about, he's been on Rogan and everything. He runs a successful business down in North Carolina now, tactical business, but he was a Green Beret, and same stories, same situation, with the training and everything, gave him a chicken. He said that he had been out and he came across somebody's beer can. They must have been out fishing their beer cans, and they had half of a beer left in one of the beer cans, and he drank it. And he didn't kill the chicken right away because it was like his buddy, so he was going to wait as long as he could before he ended up killing the chicken. So he had the chicken on a string, and it was like running around. And one of the proctors or whatever they're called came out and saw that the beer cans were there, and he was using them as like bobbers to fish.
Oh, nice, yeah.
He was kind of asking him about it, and he said, well, yeah, I found one with a half beer left in it, so I drank it. Boom, they wrote him up for it, and
yeah.
I don't know if they bumped him and had to do the training over again, but...
yeah, I definitely wouldn't have told him that.
Yeah, right?
I wouldn't have told on myself, that's for sure. An interesting note about the chickens, and you can look this up on YouTube to see it. They actually taught us how to hypnotize a chicken, believe it or not.
Yeah.
I keep telling people, kind of as a joke, that one of the best thing I ever learned in Army Special Forces was how to hypnotize a chicken. And part of butchering the chicken is when you're out there and all you have is a pocket knife. Essentially, you hold the chicken's head on the ground and you draw a line away from its nose, and it will. I don't know what is really happening, but the chicken stares down the line and doesn't move. And then to butcher the chicken, you put a stick across its neck, stand on either side of the stick, and pull the head off, and then you butcher the animal and remove the feathers and the skin. And
I never heard of that.
Yeah, but if you look that up on YouTube, you can see multiple examples because it's been so long. I said I was questioning myself. Did I really learn how to hypnotize a chicken? But yes, I did.
Yeah.
And you can see it on YouTube. One of the more interesting skills they taught us.
Right. Yeah. 83. I don't know if they still do it. Did they have I was here. I heard another Green Beret, Mike Glover, talk the other day. Now, Mike was, I think he was Afghanistan, so different generation. But he talked about a training town somewhere in North Carolina where the townies are pretty much all in on this, where you guys are doing some kind of fighting in there.
Yeah. Well.
Training?
It may have changed since then. They had an exercise called Robin Sage.
That's what he was talking about. Yeah.
Okay, so that's your graduation exercise. They break SF, back in the 80s, it's broken down into 3 phases. First phase, you learn patrolling, land navigation, and survival. You also do some other skills. There's something called Stabo. It's an extraction method where a helicopter kind of comes in and drops a harness down, and you have, I think it was 8 guys we hooked into the harness, and the helicopter picks up, and it's a way to pull somebody out of somewhere. But you learn all these skills. But for Army SF back then anyway, first phase was the physical part, the weeding part, the real mental games, and then second phase you split up. So there's an A team has 5 specialties on it. You have light weapons, heavy weapons, demolitions, medical, and communications. I was a communications guy. And so after you've completed first phase training and you've made it through that, I think back then we had like a 60% loss rate. I was talking to one of my buddies who stayed in, and so you lost 60% of the class there, and then you go to the academic portion, which is second phase, and you learn your specialty. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was 2 months of Morse code school, and then another period of time, I can't remember exactly, I think it was probably 6 weeks of communications training, on all the types of gear and the mathematics that you use to calculate your antenna lengths and so forth. And then you go do an exercise, a commo exercise out in the Pisgah National Forest, where they're sending messages to you. You learn, decryption, encryption techniques, and you're doing actually Morse code back, and you're using a ancient version of text messaging on this huge giant, But again, this is 33-year-old technology, but we were text messaging back then. And after you've done all that, you've done your first phase, you've done your second phase, then you come together and you build a student A team with those specialties, and you do Robin Sage, where you do unconventional warfare, and you talk to locals. I think it's a mixture of locals and other soldiers who are
Acting,
and so at that point you're simulating that you dropped into a foreign country, and they had a name for it. I can't remember. I think it was Pineland, I guess. I don't know.
It was I just heard this
something like that.
the other day. He was talking about.
And so you have to, guerrillas don't not necessarily want to, you have to win their confidence. You have to take care of them, winning the hearts and minds in the Vietnam term. So you have to win their confidence and their trust and earn it, and then you teach them how to be soldiers, and then you lead them on missions.
And that's the primary focus for the Green Beret, right?
It is, they call us a force multiplier. Again, this is, when I say that, I'm talking 33 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, we did. They would expected us to drop in and, train the locals and then lead them into action against whoever the other combatant was,
Yeah.
So Robin Sage is the culmination of that, and you have to lead. I think you had to lead a minimum of 2 patrols, and then be the assistant patrol leader. So there's a lot of different tasks again that you have to do, but you're essentially operating as a student A team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I got to tell you, when I listen to the guys nowadays, the guys who are fresh out of Afghanistan, that Special Ops has really evolved their training and equipment, and what these guys are doing. It's light years ahead of what I did, way back when. So.
Well, I think it's probably just like anything, if you take a football player from 2020 and put him in 1983,
sure.
It would be light years ahead of those guys. No matter, an offensive lineman in 1983 was probably 250 pounds.
It really impressive. But when I listen to those guys talk, I know I'm jabbering over here, because this is probably
kind of the idea of this. Ray, don't worry about that.
You ask my wife. Normally, if I'm at a party or somewhere, I'm an introvert, so I don't.
I get it.
So, but when I listen to those guys talk, there is a select portion of guys that I would sit down and really enjoy talking with, and those guys that you've had on, the guy from TF-160 and your Marine buddy, and those are when they talk, I'm like, I'm built that way too. I could sit down and talk with that guy for a while,
Well, that's what one of the things, I was talking to Isaac, who's the Marine Recon guy, and I said, first of all, I didn't even realize, I didn't come from a military family, so I didn't realize that stuff was an option. I didn't know what a Marine Recon guy was, or even a SEAL. The only thing I knew about Green Berets was John Wayne,
Yeah.
And, he said, you would have loved it. You had the right attitude and everything. And I said, I don't know if I would have loved, I own this business because I don't like taking orders from people. I have a real problem with it.
You would have made it in SF.
Yeah.
That's what I liked about it, is because they didn't order you to do your job. They expected you to do it, and that was the difference,
Yeah, and I think that's probably the reason why they wanted guys with higher intellect scores that
maybe
could get stuff done. They didn't need to be ordered and everything around.
There's a culture, maybe you've run into that as an athlete, but there's a culture in SF, and it's like I knew I could trust those guys. Any one of them, I could ask them for $10. Hey man, you get $10? Sure. And they wouldn't expect it back. They wouldn't hesitate. But you were also expected to show up, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Be it on a run, or, if you're cleaning the team room, and even now, if I see somebody doing something, if I go over to my in-laws' house or whatever, I am compelled to jump in and start helping. And it's just the leftover or the remnant of that SF culture, just give it 110 and always show up,
How much of that was already ingrained in you when you went in, as opposed to they instilling that in you?
That's a real good question. I think I think the Army instilled a lot of that. Maybe the raw material was there, but I wasn't an athlete. I didn't have a lot of friends because I was an introvert.
Yeah.
And all I wanted to do was go out in the woods and when I was a kid, shoot BB guns and fish, and I loved being in the outdoors. I played Little League Baseball, and that was the extent of my,
Really?
athleticism.
Yeah.
It just didn't appeal to me, and I guess probably because I didn't like large groups of people and stuff. But that when I got into that culture, I really, like I said, when I saw that movie, A Bridge Too Far, I thought, man, those guys are top notch. I don't know, it resonated with me.
Sure, yeah.
And then when I got in the Army, the way they did things and the stuff they were doing, I really grooved to that. And so I guess the raw material was there, and they polished it up and sent me on my way.
Nowadays, if you decide you're going to go into, Army Rangers or whatever, you can pretty much go online, figure out. I mean, you're not going to get the full extent of it, but you're going to be able to see videos of these guys going through this training and go, okay, well, looks like they're running a lot. I need to be running this many miles a week or doing this many pull-ups. You didn't have any of that. So how did you get ready to go in?
Well, the short answer is I didn't.
Yeah.
I had no idea what I was getting into. And in fact, I was looking through there used to be a magazine called Gung Ho. Have you ever heard of it?
I remember that from years and years. They used to have that in Soldier of Fortune.
Right.
Yeah.
It's along that same line. And when you didn't have all these websites online, I guess that's how they connected with those kind of guys. But I told a buddy of mine, I said, hey, this is what they set me up with. This is what I'm going to do in the military. And he happened to be in a store, and he got a Gung Ho magazine about the airborne, and he gave it to me, and I read through this, and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
And that was the extent of my, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this. And I didn't run, I didn't do push-ups, I didn't do anything. I didn't prepare at all. I went into basic training, and it kicked my ass from day one. And I just remember being stubborn and sticking with it, And it was the same thing. They just tried that weeding process and tried to mess with your head. But basic was good, man. They started you off. I remember we did a short run, and it destroyed me. And the next time they went a little bit farther and a little bit faster, and they kept doing it. And they built me up. I was lucky because I think I went basic, and then I went directly into airborne school, which was more physical. So that's, I guess, was my preparation. Basic training, which wasn't so bad. Airborne school was a couple notches. They ran us. They had something called Heartbreak Hill. And I remember going up that hill and it just sucking the life out of you, And so we did tons of pull-ups and push-ups in airborne school, in addition to the stuff to prepare you for, jumping out of an airplane. But they were really building up your lats and your legs so you could take the impact,
Yeah, that's one of the things. I was talking to a strength coach of mine who worked with. I've gotten into this tactical strength and conditioning program now with the National Strength and Conditioning Association. I was talking to another strength coach involved, and he said that the difference between airborne in like World War II was the guys were coming right off the farm and they weighed 160 pounds. And now the guys going into airborne are living a fairly sedentary lifestyle and they're 185 pounds, and that impact just destroys these guys.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I was looking at parachutes trying to remember what the designations were. They've got a new parachute now. It's more like it looks like a box or a square, and it has a lower descent rate so people can take the impact better.
Yeah.
So maybe we've got bigger, a little bit heavier soldiers. I don't know, but they specifically use this parachute because it's got a lower descent rate, which softens the impact.
Yeah.
But it's just it's amazing to see how these things have evolved over the years.
Sure, right.
And I did a lot of looking and talking to buddies because I haven't thought about this stuff in years.
Yeah.
I can't remember a lot of this stuff I can't remember, and I'm talking to my friends, and all these stories are just like someone flipping the switch.
Right.
All the stories coming on.
Well, it was such an amazing time. In 1983, people don't understand how scary to go into the military in 1983, which is what people don't understand, is one of the scariest years ever as far as our nation. I mean, in the world, because that was it. I just read a book called 1983, and you've got Reagan amping it up, and
Yeah.
the Soviets amping it up, and it's who's going to back down, and then Stanislav Petrek, who was the Soviet guy. Did you ever hear that story?
No.
So Stanislav was he was basically one of these guys who monitored video screens all night long in some Soviet, base somewhere, looking for airstrikes. You're looking for missile strikes. And he was just waiting for them to come in. Stanislav had the night off, and his counterpart, who was working that night, got sick. So they called him in. So on his night off, he comes in, he's monitoring it, and U.S. military was doing some kind of large operation in Europe, kind of a drill thing, and they got on the Soviet radar, they got all these hits. So first they got the one hit, and they called Petrov over, and he said, well, let's just wait and see what happens. And then hit. It looked like, and he never pulled the trigger, never called anyone and said, hey.
I didn't know his name was Stanislav Petrek, but I heard that story that there was a guy.
Saved the world, basically.
Right, yeah, because he kept his cool, and
Yeah.
what he was looking at the radar screens and seeing what looked like missile strikes coming in.
Yeah. And they ousted him. They ruined his career. He left, came to the United States, died in a one-bedroom apartment with a television set and a chair.
God bless him. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of proxy wars going on, back then, where we were duking it out, but we were using, we were supporting one country, they were
South
supporting,
America,
and it was different. When the wall came down, when was that? 89.
Yeah.
That started to change.
It.
Yeah, and then Gorbachev, and Gorbachev seemed like a pretty decent guy.
Right.
I got a good story about that. We were coming back from Europe. I did tons of training in the U.S. and overseas, and we were actually coming back from an operation in Europe, and we had C-130s, so we were hopping, and we ended up in Iceland. We got off the bird, and
one of my favorite places on the planet.
Right. Well, that was when Reagan and Gorbachev were having some kind of summit
in Reykjavik.
Yes.
Yep.
And we landed in Keflavik, and
just landed there a couple years ago.
Okay, so there was a bunch of Soviet guys, probably KGB goons, running around the airport. Well, then I didn't, I mean, I remember they had these long kind of like trench coats and
stereotypical.
Yes,
Russian
it
guys.
did look like your stereotypical Russian guy, and I remember seeing a Russian aircraft on the ramp, so maybe they landed there and then drove to Reykjavik. But anyhow, when these guys saw, all these SF guys getting off the air, because we were in our battle dress uniforms and our berets, and when we got off the airport, that got their attention. They're like, what's going on here? Well, it was just happenstance. We just happened to be coming back from Europe and landed there. But I just wondered what those guys were thinking, because I saw a lot of lifted eyebrows, and I didn't think anything of it. And then we loaded up. I think we just gassed up and hit the John, and then got back on our way back to the States. But
yeah, it's a shame. Iceland is a fantastic place to visit. We spent a week there a few years ago, and flying into Keflavik, and then driving all over the country.
As I recall, it was kind of like there was no trees.
There's no trees.
Yeah, and it's just scrub kind of, and scrub brush, and some grass and
lava
rock.
rocks.
That's it.
It looks like the surface of some weird planet you've never seen before.
Yeah.
So your counterpart were, was it Spetsnaz? Was that what
Spetsnaz? Yeah. But they're not, built exactly the way an A-team is. They're more like, I don't know. I don't know. I think those guys are more like I don't know, maybe a Rangers or a Marine Reconnaissance or a clique somewhere in between. It's hard to pigeonhole them and say, well, those guys, because Rangers are your exemplary light infantry, and then SEALs are your great naval commandos, and then out of the SEALs they take their top, their tier 1 guys, and they make those guys the anti-terrorist guys.
Dev group. Yeah.
Yep, and the Army's got a version of that too, Delta Force, and so it's tough to say where those guys. And again, I'm just relying on what happened, 30 years ago. So they may have evolved and changed too. Who knows?
I have a buddy, and I think I told you this already. I have a buddy who he got into the program, and I don't know if this is a new thing the Army does, where they say, well, why don't you join, and we're going to get you fast tracked right into Special Forces, and and probably 99.9% of people go in there and they end up just in the infantry because they're not going to make it. This kid, I'll just say his first name's Eric. He came to me, and I had a garage gym in Amherst,
Right, yeah.
and he said, hey, can you train me for this? Because I got this special thing, and I really want to do this, and everyone's telling me I'm not going to make it. And this kid came out and was not an athlete either, and just destroyed my garage. I mean, he's out there, and I don't know what I'm doing because I don't know what he's going to have to go through. So I'm like trying to look through stuff on the very, early internet. I just got a computer. So I've got him in there doing pull-ups and squats with a kettlebell, and he's out back flipping a tire and running. And that dude went all the way through basic, all the way through into this, but became a Green Beret. And now I don't know where he is, because I get a message from him every once in a while. Hey, this is going on.
Right.
How are you doing? And then poof, he's gone again.
Right.
So,
when he walked in the door and he said, everyone's telling me I'm not going to make it.
Yeah.
He had the motivation. That was you. You had your raw material when he walked in the door.
You're not going to tell me,
Right.
motherfucker,
Yeah,
I'm
right.
going. Yeah.
Exactly. I remember saying that to myself. But that guy walked in the door, and he was one of those guys probably that. That's what they're looking for. That's what that whole weeding process is out. We can talk about that weeding process, but your Navy buddy covered it, and your Marine buddy covered it. It's all about looking for that guy that is going to keep pushing and not.
Yeah, if you're
quit.
going to quit doing flutter kicks then you're going to quit in the bush for
Please
sure.
don't ever say those. I really despise flutter kicks. And we ran in boots, and
shin splints. And
not all the
everything
time, in basic and airborne school, we were able to use, tennis shoes, but that's another thing, the fitness gear has evolved too,
Sure,
so,
right.
But I did some runs in boots, and I remember Bragg doing runs. They had this sand run, they called it, and it was a trail, and it was deep, beach sand. And man, running that in that hot North Carolina, the hot humid weather, just absolutely sucked. It wasn't about fitness, or it was just about finishing it, making the run.
I remember being down in the Outer Banks and literally having 105-degree temperatures. Just what in the hell? You walk outside and it hits you right in the face.
Bragg was, in the winter it's cold and wet, in the summer it's hot and humid. And I don't.
It's probably a swampy area, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of swamp in there. I was fortunate to go through in the wintertime, so I didn't have to deal with ticks and all the different bugs and the snakes. And I remember on my graduation exercise in third phase, I took a knee over a snake. You ever see you get the rucksack on and the rifle, and the guy takes a knee. Well, I took a knee, and I looked down, and there's a snake. Well, it was middle of the winter, and not middle of the winter. It was very cold. Okay, and so it wasn't cold for North Carolina, and it wasn't moving very quick. But I thought, in another couple months, this could have been very painful.
Right.
And I can't tell you if it was venomous or not. I just remember I took a knee over a snake, and man, I never stood up so quick in my life. When I saw that thing.
Isn't that weird that we have that weird primitive thing where you see a snake? I mean, 9 times out of 10 you could step on the back of its neck and it'd be over, but you see it and it just something happens in your brain.
Right.
And I'm not one of these guys who's afraid of snakes, but you always get that, holy shit, there's a snake there,
Well, yeah, your mind plays tricks on you. I did a mission into Fort Lewis, Washington, and we were out in the middle of nowhere. We had first generation night observation devices, and I want to say we were an 8-man team, because you're never at full strength. There was always injuries, and guys were out sick, or you weren't up to strength because you needed another guy. And we were on this trail in Fort Lewis. It was an animal trail, no doubt, and it just got so damn dark that we set up camp on a trail. So we just set our gear down, set up a little perimeter, and we guys would take 2 hours. You had to pull security while you're in there, and the rest of your team would sleep. And well, they gave me the night observation devices. We called them nods. I couldn't see anything. I put those things on. I could see 5-8 feet in front of me, but the stuff that was out there, listening to the things moving through the woods, And and I'm thinking to myself, man, I should have brought a magazine with real ammo in it, because it was training mission. We had blanks, your brain was, my brain was playing tricks on me. I'm like, that doesn't sound good,
Right. Is that
I don't
a bear?
know I don't know what. I hope that's not coming to get me, because basically I'm going to break this plastic stock over its head and hope for the best, But that's that hard wiring for survival, I guess, in the brain.
Did you get? Lisa said that you guys listened to Jocko. Did you get to hear his podcast with that John Stryker Meyer?
No, she had a book from him.
I've got it at home. I haven't read it yet, but.
And it's just one of those things that when I heard the book, I think it was about leadership, and they recommended it.
The Jocko book, right? Yeah.
Sure, yeah, but she had the audio version of the book, and so I just happened to be walking by her office. She's got a home office. She works from home, and I heard that. I didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, I really grooved to that.
Yeah.
Who is that guy? Well, his name is Jocko.
Willink, yeah.
Yeah, and she says, I think he was a SEAL or something like that. So I listened to it. I'm like, yeah, man, he's definitely on point.
Yeah.
He's an apex special ops guy. You got those guys that in special ops regular.
Yeah.
Like I was in special ops, but you got these apex guys that are really, they're the whole package.
Anytime you have any kind of elite people, you're going to have the low end of the spectrum and the high end, and they're still more elite than 99.9% of the population. But within that, you're going to get your Dev Grus and your Delta Force guys and
the cream of the cream.
Right. There's always going to be those guys. He had this guy on. His name is John Stryker Meyer, and he was a Green Beret in. Well, I don't know if he just said Special Forces, and his job was when he went through schools and everything. He got to Vietnam, and they gave him they volunteered. They came out and said, we have a secret mission. We can't tell you anything about it. We need volunteers. And him and two other guys volunteered for it. Their job was they went and they took off all their dog tags, all their patches, and their job was to do incursions into Laos and Cambodia.
Yeah.
And they were like 4-man teams, and only 2 of them were Army guys. The other 2 were South Vietnamese guys. And they would go and get in these amazing firefights and get lifted out, like you talked about, with the ropes attached to them.
Yep, Stavo. Yeah, that sounds like alert team, long range reconnaissance.
Yes, yeah.
Did that sound like what they were talking about? Yeah. So yeah, they called the the Cambodians or whoever their foreign teammates were. They call them indigs, indigenous personnel. But that's one of the many. There's a bunch of different missions that SF do, and they tailor it to the conflict that they're in.
Right.
And so who knows what they were looking for.
I'll have to send you that podcast. It's like 3 podcasts where this guy just talks about missions, and it could have been a Rambo movie. They're just, and nobody knew anything about it, and he's probably in his late 70s, and he Jocko kind of urged him to talk about this, and now the guy's like got 8 million Instagram followers. Right. He has no idea what his daughter's running his Instagram page.
It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
I really consider myself lucky to be associated with those guys. I only did it for 4 years, and they were just really top-notch guys. I remember thinking when I was in that, this is pretty good, but I'm sure it's better elsewhere. Well, it wasn't. That was, everyone was on, for the most part, on the same page. You had top-notch people. You had your, high end of the spectrum, low end of the spectrum, like you were talking about. There was always a guy that was trying to get out of doing something,
Sure, yeah.
But for the most part, those guys were really all top-notch, super guys, super people. And ever since then, my whole life, I've always been looking to that as an example. You forget, like I'm not one of those apex special ops guys. I'm just a regular guy. And sometimes I'll do stuff and I say to myself, I wouldn't have done that when I was in SF. It's time to tighten up a little bit.
Yeah.
When you're talking about Vietnam, my stepdad, my mom's husband, he was a swift boat guy. Did you ever see?
Yeah.
You know what the swift boats are?
Absolutely.
He was a swift boat guy in Vietnam. He did his whole career in the Navy, and he was a submariner most of the time. But he did a couple tours in Nam as a swift boat guy, and he was constantly dropping off Navy SEALs and
that had to have been the pinnacle for those guys, because it was all rivers and.
He had actually 2 Bronze Stars for action in Vietnam. His boat got ambushed and took an RPG through the front of the boat. It traveled the length of the boat and hit the engine. And he was actually standing on the engine cover, which he told me at that time was one of the only parts that was made out of solid metal. And when the RPG went off on the engine, it blew him. He was standing on the engine cover, so it blew him from the rear of the boat into the front of the boat, into the twin 50 mount. So he stood up, put the 50 into operation, and broke the ambush by smoking all those guys on the bank there. And then they beached the boat because it was sinking, and he grabbed one of the AKs from one of the Viet Cong and chased him into the woods for it. So he got the Bronze Star. He's actually buried in Arlington.
That's amazing.
Yep. So I'm very fortunate that I just a great bunch of guys.
My guess is most of your instructors were probably Vietnam guys, right?
There was a mix. In fact, there was a major there. You ever hear of the Sante raid?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so there was a major there who was actually on the Sante raid, and he addressed our class. And when I was brand new, I think I'd been in the Army just a year or a little bit over. I thought, man, that guy's out there.
Yeah.
But in reality, he had been through a lot and a different kind of thing, and he was right on point with what he was talking about and where he was at mentally. Eventually, I realized that's the kind of I don't know what you call it, maximum effort, mental, physical. That's where he was at. Even as an older guy.
There's a guy in my condo complex, and I have never talked to him in person. I don't even know who he is. But a friend of a friend, actually a friend that me and Lisa went to high school with, got me in touch with him and got me his email. So I don't know if he functions okay still, or like if he's probably 80 years old.
Yeah, right,
so,
right.
But I've sent him an email. Took him about a month to get back to me. But he was a pilot who got shot down over Vietnam and ended up in the Hanoi Hilton for years. And he was giving talks at different military and colleges and stuff like that. And he says, well, I don't speak in public anymore. And who knows if he even knows what a podcast is,
Sure.
So but I'm going to hunt him down one of these days and at least have a beer with him and, just
I'm sure
hear
he's
some
got
stories.
some stories to tell. Yeah. I mean, like you say, Vietnam and the Cold War is kind of lost.
It really is.
Nowadays, I mean, that's something I knew about, and I think maybe I was always interested in World War II and the military, and so I always had a good beat on that stuff. And I grew up a little bit with Vietnam. My father-in-law is a Vietnam Marine. His brother was a Vietnam Marine.
Yeah.
Actually, his dad went through the last pandemic, lost both his parents. So all those things that are history, I could actually touch and talk to them. And it's a lot of that stuff is lost, and you just wonder what kids now are connecting to, what's important to them.
It's really tough because I have the people who I train in the gym here, the people that are my age, let's say 35 to 50, 35, well, let's say 35 and up is a whole different breed of human. So they come in here, they want to work hard, get after it, and they're whatever you put on that board, they're going to do. And the kids come in, and I don't have the tools necessarily to deal with them mentally. So I have a younger guy who works for me who he runs my program with them, and just because I know my limitations, and that frustration is going to get to me because I can't figure that out. You come in here, you tell me you want to play football at some high level, but you're not willing to run around the block. I mean, there's a disconnect here.
I get what you're saying. When I was in law enforcement, the new guys coming in right before I retired were so I don't know that they know how to talk to people. Now,
God, that's the second Elyria police officer who's told me that.
Yes, I was a introvert, but by virtue of the fact I was a policeman, the whole thing about being a cop is being able to talk to people and get the story, whatever their story is, and then sift out, what sounds real based on my experience, what is bullshit, based on my experience, how does it compare to the witnesses, how does it compare to the evidence on the ground. And so if you can't talk to people as a cop, you're not going to be successful.
Right.
And these new, these kids coming in right before I left, and I didn't leave. I left from a different department. I retired out of a different department. I really had a great time in Elyria. I learned a lot there. But the new kids that were coming into this other department really had difficulty talking to people, and I wonder if it's because they're used to talking, and they, rather than carrying on a dynamic conversation, they're crafting a response in a text, and no, that don't sound right. Let me delete that last section, and I don't know if they can carry on it, or if they have the skills, to 100% carry on a dynamic conversation.
Well, this other officer that I had talked to, that I said that said the same thing. He was on a board where they were hiring these kids. And they were coming. He was coming in. He was like, it's like they don't know how to interact with you. They don't know how to do an interview because they've never talked in person.
Right.
And my biggest fear, I was telling my wife, is, so when I married my wife, she was way out of my league. Like, I mean,
I know that feeling.
But I had to go up and I had to talk to her.
Yep.
And I had a minute to make that good first impression, get her giggling, and then I was okay. Kids don't necessarily have that skill anymore because they see someone they like, they send her a text message, and they're not quick like that.
Yeah, that's really weird to me. Yeah, and I've read somewhere that they like to think about their response, and I don't know. It's by virtue of the fact that I had to talk to a lot of people, I got good at being a mouthy introvert. You know what I mean? Just because you kind of have to win their respect. You got a real short time to kind of get their trust or earn their trust a little bit, and they're always a lot of folks in Elyria anyway were mistrustful of the police.
Sure.
And so you kind of just got to get down and say, look, I am not, Officer Roger Ramjet of the, hey, my name is so and so, and what happened here today? Can you, And I don't know. In my experience dealing with that generation that we're talking about, the ones that I've seen haven't had that skill.
Yeah.
Maybe they're out there, but the ones I've dealt with, really
I
haven't.
worked in corrections for 19 years, and that was,
My hat's off to you, by the way.
It's a shitty job.
Brother, I mean, for me, we cuffed them and stuffed them, and that was the last I dealt with them. But you guys had close quarters all the time.
With them. It was tough.
Yeah.
But being bigger and athletic, I think, helped me intimidate some of them. But the best skill I had was just being able to. So I would come in, and when I first started working, all the new guys had like 2 handcuff pouches on their belts and all this stuff. And I'd look at the guys that were really doing good work in the pods and not having a hard day, and they would just have a belt with their rubber gloves attached to the back. So that's how I started doing it. So, but those guys that had just the one pouch on their belt had a much better rapport with these guys because they would sit down and they would bring their voice way down and they would just talk to them, and like look around like they were in on something together. And that's what I learned how to do, was just talk to these people.
Just treat them like a decent human being. I would never try to speak, their slang, or I just, was at a base level, just myself, Ray, not Officer Ray or anything like that. I just tried to talk to him on a one-on-one, and it worked. I mean, I always thought of it when I was doing it, winning the hearts and minds, and being able to understand their language a bit,
Right.
Just like you've dropped into a foreign country, you have to earn their respect. But I was able to, I knew I could understand that language, that street language. You have to understand what it means. And I did, but I didn't try and talk it back to them, which would come across as probably fake, I thought, anyhow.
100%. That's for me and Lisa, let's face it, we were from Amherst. We never saw a black person until we got on the job, so it was like a whole new world,
Right. Well, and it's not just them. It's not just African Americans. There were, Hispanics, and even the Caucasian Americans that were, lower income. I wouldn't characterize it as African American only. It was that lower income level.
Yes.
Living in places like Wilkesville or 1864 Middle Avenue that dealt with what they dealt with on a regular basis, and fear of the police and fear of retribution if they spoke to the police. And so I just tried to
It
treating
had to be
decent.
an ideal setup for what you were doing. You know, I mean, your military training and career was, you were putting all those skills to work. You know,
Some of it came in handy. That kind of the law enforcement is definitely like regular infantry. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is they have a very defined chain of command, and
Sure, yeah.
and so my kind of relaxed attitude, where I didn't want to salute major and
Yeah.
blow in the company area, that didn't fly very well.
Yeah.
So I stepped on some toes over there.
Yeah.
But out in the street, it helped me out in the street talking
Yeah.
to people. But and that was my fault for not trying to realize that I wasn't in that kind of environment anymore, and it's time to, and eventually I picked up on it, when the older I got, the smarter I got. But yeah, I can remember when I started my first night shift at EPD. We had one of the low income housing areas had shots fired call, and they had dispatch online with the complainant, and the whole shift was there, because that's how it worked. When something kicked off like that, everybody showed up.
Yeah, right.
And we were online, essentially line abreast, and we were in the middle of this housing area in the middle of the night, and the lady's talking us in, and dispatch is relaying it to us, and they're saying, okay, well, she lost sight of him, but he's right up ahead of you, right around the corner, and you're getting close. And let me tell you, I thought, even based on my military experience, I'm online with a pistol with these guys, and I have no idea where this bad guy is.
Yeah.
And I'm saying to myself, this is absolutely crazy. What am I doing here,
Right, yeah.
And 6 months later, I needed that.
Yeah.
6 months after I'd been on 6 to 8 months, I got addicted to that level of adrenaline.
Right.
And I wanted to be there doing that stuff, and that's what made it for me. When we had an alert tone at Illyria, so when you had a very serious call go out, before they would give the call out, they would push this button in dispatch, and a high-pitched tone would go out over the radio. And right when that thing went out, you knew it was getting ready to be a serious incident.
Yeah.
And then, I would normally stop the car. My heart rate would be through the roof, and I would just stop the car and wait to figure out where I was going.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to hammer the accelerator, be going the wrong way. And then, they'd give out the address, and I'd get it set in my head. I'd take a deep breath, and I'd turn it around or get going where I needed to go,
Yeah.
But I always thought of that, when I first started, I'm like, man, this is too real. I don't want to be here. And within 8 months, I was like, this is for me, And it was just like jumping out of airplanes or, mountain climbing or whatever else. I needed that, that adrenaline rush.
You need that rush.
Yeah, I think I was a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, not so much anymore.
It's funny you talk about that and the call coming over the radio, because, when I was in work for the sheriff's department, you would get, very matter of fact, back up Northwest Plot. And if you were eating your lunch or out, I used to rub Copenhagen, you just went. Everyone just goes.
Yep.
And and it was fun. That was, you get that, let's go, and you want to be the first guy down there, And I'm in freaking Target yesterday, and they've got us all lined up 6 feet, and the lines get long.
Yeah.
And a girl walks by me, and I didn't even notice her, but she must have the walkie-talkie on her hip, and someone up at the front said, "We need backup at register 6." And just hearing that over a radio, it clicked, and I started laughing. I told my wife, I said, my heart rate just jumped through the roof, just that stupid, and I haven't heard that call in years,
Right. It meant something totally
I was
different.
going to go choke somebody out at register 6.
Right. Bodies slam them. I remember it well. I became even more of an adrenaline junkie doing that, and doing law enforcement stuff, and about midway through my law enforcement career, I went to a different department, which was more a suburb of Cleveland,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really laid back, and it was a great way for me to deprogram
That's true, yeah.
and come down a little bit. The only thing that hasn't left me is night shift. I spent a lot of time on night shift, on 12-hour shifts, so I was wide awake at 3 o'clock this morning,
Yeah.
and I was reading online and stuff, and I finally managed to get back to sleep around 5 or something like that, but I've been out for, a little bit, probably just under a year and a half, and I still can't convert back to a normal sleep schedule.
Wow, yeah.
So I don't know if that's just because I did it for so long, or I drink massive amounts of coffee,
I was on night shift so when I went to the detention home, I spent the majority of the time on night shift, and it took me a year before, I would get done at the gym, and then I would think, oh, man, I got to go into work tonight at 10. And it's just like, oh, no, you don't. You can actually sleep in a bed all night long. And it took a while for that to go away.
Well, and I definitely feel that because being retired now from law enforcement, I get to go to all the family dinners. You know,
Right.
I get to go to all the Thanksgivings, all the Christmases, and I gave up the majority of those when I was in the Army, and then when I was a policeman. You know, you don't get that.
Yeah.
You know, and when I went to that other department, I also got my sergeant stripes there, so I was even lower on the totem pole for getting time off because, you know, if one of my guys wanted it off, it became a manpower issue, and I gave it to him rather than take it myself. And that's not because I was any hero or anything like that, but, you know, take care of your guys, they'll take care of you.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I get that, man. It's so nice to be able to sleep in. It's so nice to be able to go to every, you know, Christmas, every Thanksgiving. Yeah, I got a ton of pictures on Thanksgiving and Christmas with all my buddies. You know,
Really, yeah.
eating Thanksgiving dinner at, you know, on break at the PD, and not so many with my family.
Yeah.
You know? So.
Jeez, I know. I mean, I remember you get some of them off, even if you get higher up on the, you know, before I got married and had a kid, I would just volunteer to work them so guys that had kids could go home and then when I started getting the end of my career, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take those nights off. And
So did you do 20 with
19?
19?
Which is crazy because, you know, I had one more year, but I hated the job so much, and this place started blowing up, and my wife said, you need to quit. You need to quit and run this because you can't do both well. So it was a little weird, but retirement wasn't that good. I took it what I had, put it in 401k, and let, you know, those guys deal with it.
I totally understand that too, because towards the end of my career, I was kind of like, I was a square peg in a round hole at that other department.
Yeah.
I was kind of like a, you know, a leery policeman. I didn't fit in with the whole writing traffic, and, you know, and that's, you know, what they're doing is what they're doing. It's valid to them, and I should have stayed at EPD and finished my career out there, but there was a time when I realized it was time to move on. So, you know, I was thinking about getting back into flying again. I actually left SF. I went to college, and then I went to Rhode Island and got all my civilian flight ratings. And I got them all. I graduated, got my flight instructor rating right when Eastern and Pan Am both went under. You know, So, you know, fast forward to 2013, and the aviation starts blowing up, and they're hiring people, and Boeing forecasts a pilot shortage, and I started flying this past January.
Again, you started doing it again.
Yeah, I tried to get recertified, you know, because I got fairly good flight time, but it's really old, and so you know, I had to relearn glass cockpits and all that other stuff, and you know, it's not. The old radios, the aviation radios that I flew with, are in museums now.
Right.
You know,
right.
I'm sure there's still some in airplanes, but you know, majority of airliners use glass cockpits. So I had to learn that technology, and I had to really learn the flying skills again, bust the rust off, learn how to land an airplane and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, then, you know, global pandemic, and now the airlines are, you know, who knows when they're going to come back again.
I was just going to ask you, what do you think is going to happen with? I mean, I have a feeling that we're looking at some kind of giant government bailout of the airline industry.
Yeah, I really don't know. You know, 6 months ago, Boeing would have told you that they have this report that they put out, and they kept putting it out saying that, you know, pilots are going to be hugely in demand, and there's a huge pilot shortage, and all this stuff. And now, you know, it's this pandemic. Just, I mean, the great majority of the aviation fleets, the commercial aviation fleets, are sitting on the ground, you know.
Right.
So I really feel bad for those guys, because they're going to lose a lot of folks, you know. And all the people that are in the training pipeline that were hoping to be, you know, that 6 months ago, that was the best career ever. You know, aviation and recreational vehicles are the canaries for the economy, if you think about it, you know. And so who knows how, you know, I don't know, you know, Boeing, like I said, Boeing's forecasted a huge need for pilots into the late part of this decade, and that's all gone away. Who knows what, you know, so I don't know the answer to that.
I was wondering if guys who have access to small airplanes or, are used to flying these small planes. When we go down to Key West, you have an option. You can, if you're going to the Dry Tortugas, you can take this 3-hour out, 3-hour back boat, big ferry, or you can fly down in 20 minutes in this little, and it's $300 to fly down, So I'm wondering, geez, is that the future? You don't want to be on an airplane with all these people who have God knows what,
Sure.
maybe smaller planes with, more pilots and.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm done with this. I mean, I am sick to death of putting on rubber gloves and a mask when I go in.
Yeah.
So
We shook hands when you walked through the door. It just
didn't even think about it until right now.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people are in our boat. I mean, and I think eventually, I think for the near future, you're probably right. People are going to be very pensive about going back into airplanes and stuff. But I think the demand will come back.
Yeah.
And I don't know when, but.
Well, you see it already. So yesterday, all those shops in downtown Vermilion were finally open. With their social distance. We're going back May 26th. I've got a list of some basic hygiene things that everyone should be doing anyhow. But downtown Vermilion, it was packed with people just wandering around. And I think, just like you said, I think people are just gonna eventually go, okay, there's a risk. But I was talking the other day on the podcast about the Hong Kong flu in '68. They still had fucking Woodstock. Nobody locked anything down. It killed 100,000 Americans. It killed 1 million people worldwide. No one did anything.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I never even heard of it until you just mentioned it right now.
Yeah. Woodstock during a pandemic that no one even cared about. Oh, you might get sick.
Okay, whatever, right? As long as I can listen to some good music.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what happens if they have that second spike or whatever. When it first came out, pandemic is a pretty scary word,
Yeah.
And I think about, Lisa's grandpa, who went through the first one, lost both his parents, and I talked to him at length about that because I was interested in it, and this was well before this pandemic. Well, when this pandemic came out, I said to myself, well, I'm in my late 50s. I'm not in the high risk group, but I'm in a more risk group
than 20s.
Yeah. And so I'm like, I wonder what that would be like, getting sick and then going downhill rapidly and ending up in a hospital. I'm like, what happens,
Yeah.
And I really thought about that at length, and I'm like, well, I guess there's not a whole lot I can do about it, really. If it's my time, it's my time.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem like that panned out, I mean, there's
My
a lot of
wife,
sick folks, but.
Yeah, my wife works at the VA, and when this all broke, now we were on a cruise ship when this all hit. So we got home, and I got sick. So who knows if I had it or not? I don't know. But she went to work, and it was like DEFCON 5. They were building COVID wings. They were hiring nurses and not making them do their training every year because they just didn't have time. They just need to get they got everybody in there, and they got the ventilators, and they got the masks and the gloves, and they're ready to go, and they just. Boom, nothing happened. Not nothing, but
it didn't
way lower than what they thought was going to happen.
Sure.
Which is a good thing, great, but
I'm happy for it.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I don't think we're out of the woods yet.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic, but kind of cautiously watching things, and we're still, we're very careful at the house, and
sure.
Until I came here and shook your hand without even thinking about it.
I do it all the time. I didn't think.
Well, I saw a buddy of mine. I went for a hike with my kid at Mill Hollow, and most of the guys at Elyria call me Boom Boom. And
I was told to ask you about that. Lisa told me to ask you that question.
Okay, well, so they searched for a nickname. I think it's just military and police, or whenever you get into that kind of a subculture thing, they're trying to find a nickname for you. And one of the guys was a big sports fan guy. Do you remember the boxer Ray Boom Boom Mancini?
Of course, yeah. He lives in Youngstown. He does his own podcast.
Okay, so because my first name was Ray, it was convenient, and so they started calling me Boom Boom. And this one guy started calling me, and then it kind of spread around the PD. And honestly, I think if you told them my full first and last name, a lot of those guys I served with probably wouldn't know who you're talking about. And because I was Boom or Boom Boom to them, and which, by the way, the great majority of those guys have retired from law enforcement, like myself, or moved on to other things. But yeah, it wasn't for any other reason than I had the same first name as that boxer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was at Mill Hollow with my kid, and I hear this loud, deep voice yelling boom boom, and I turn around. It's one of the guys I was at EPD with, a great guy, and he's a reverend now, believe it or not, and he was officiating in an outdoor wedding. So
Nice.
I same thing. I said, well, let me give you a virtual handshake, and he said bullshit, and he grabbed my hand, gave me a big old hug, and handshake and everything else, and it's just larger than life personalities, really good people too.
Yeah.
He's a good guy, and I learned a lot from him. He was an experienced officer when I came on.
Those guys help for sure.
Yeah, good guy, big dude too.
Yeah.
Just that big booming deep voice, and just wide through the shoulders, and kind of guy I like to show up on a call with. You know what I mean?
Right.
I was like, hey, I'm the nice guy. If you get out of line, you got to deal with him.
Well, speaking of nicknames, your wife, I knew her as Cujo.
Yeah, she told me about that story too.
Let me tell you this. There's 2 times in my life where I've looked at Lisa. Once when we were in high school, and once long after high school, where I was like, holy fuck, this chick is squared away. We were in senior lounge my senior year, and it was just like it sounded. You just hung out, did your thing. And this girl said something to Lisa. I don't know what she said to Lisa. One of these girls, big giant poofy hair, the whole 9 yards.
Sure.
And we're all sitting there, and we're sitting in folding chairs around the staff table and talking to Marie Stack, who is, her best friend's mother. And she said something to Lisa, and Lisa stood up, folded her chair, and whacked this girl like WWE. Wham! And then proceeded to stomp a mud hole at her. And people came and, dragged her off. And I think back then it wasn't such a big deal. But I was like, holy shit. Yeah. And that's where Cujo came from.
Yep.
And then years later, we're standing in front of my house, and I was doing something, and Lisa was walking by, I think with one of your kids in the stroller. And she stopped to talk, and we're sitting there talking, and we're right on the corner of this intersection. And
yeah, we lived right around the corner from you.
Right. Okay, so it was right there. It was like Wood Hill in Cleveland. And this guy pulls up, and he's looking. I didn't even pay attention, but I don't know if he was looking at us or looking at her or whatever. And she just turned around and go, "What the fuck are you looking at?" It just drove off. Like, damn, Cujo, way to go.
Sounds like my wife.
Yeah.
Well, police officer, and she dealt with some horrible stuff as an investigator.
Yeah, she had a rough career, man.
Yeah, my hat's off to her, because at some point I said, listen, I can't hear these stories anymore.
Right.
She needed someone to talk to, and I just couldn't, because I would get it when I would hear what was going on, and I don't want to discuss what she did, but when I would hear some of the things that she had to deal with, I would just get enraged. Sure. I mean, like, it just, I would want to go track that person down and deal with them harshly, if you get my meaning.
Yeah.
And I just said, I can't take it anymore, because I would lay awake, with that story running through my head, and it was like real Stephen King type stuff, and it was happening, And it's kind of like, if I don't think about it, it's not happening, Because again, as a policeman, honestly, they got a bad rap recently or for the past few years, but most guys just want to help. I mean, even what you did as a CO, I just wanted to help. I'm sure it was the same, and I just wanted to be part of the team that help clean up or help do whatever.
Yeah. When you think about the millions and millions of interactions that police officers have, probably on a daily basis with people of all types, of millions of interactions, and one cop does something, that's in a lot of cases borderline. Or you weren't in the situation to actually see the whole thing happen, and it's a national uprising and cops are bad, and it's an impossible job, not done by Green Berets for the most part. They're just guys who want to go and help, and it's an impossible job.
Well, that's what it was. Most of those guys, I mean, it's just like you were talking about earlier. You have ends of the spectrum, that bell curve, and you've got guys that, that are really top notch. I mean, I remember a couple guys at Leary that were really top notch cops. I mean, sharp thinking, quick on their feet, you know, when we were dealing with people, able to talk them down, just really super guys. Then you get guys that were, you know, trying to blow off calls and, you know, and not a whole lot of those guys. But I mean, it's just like anything else. You got that bell curve, and hopefully I ended up somewhere in between. I can remember being short with people and not happy, you know, whether I had a bad day or whatever.
Sure.
I'm not perfect. I'm human, you know. But for the most part, those guys, most of those guys are just out there trying to do the right thing for the right reasons.
Yeah.
You know, that's, you know.
It's all you can do. It's a tough job, and it's can't always be perfect. And now, anytime you're not, I remember being in New Orleans. My wife and I were in New Orleans, and there was a couple of horse cops just standing in the middle of Bourbon Street, and these two, one guy was egging them on and egging them on. The other guy was filming the whole thing, and the cops, just for good, they said just keep walking. But he was egging them on to get on that video.
Yeah, that's a shame. You know, I mean, it's really frustrating. You know, if those guys could, they just want to be able to post something on YouTube. You know, but if they could really think, you know, these guys are here to help me. Really,
who are they going to call when they get robbed? You know,
sure, that's it. Man, we have really covered the spectrum, haven't we?
Right? I know. That's this podcast kind of rambles no matter who I have on.
So hey, I got to tell you, when you say Green Berets, you know, when I was coming up the ranks and even nowadays, that is when you hear that term Green Beret, I think about all those movies that I saw.
Right.
But really, what we always referred to ourselves as were special forces soldiers, you know, and I always thought that term gave the wrong impression, like, you know, like I was some kind of expert in hand-to-hand combat, which I'm not, or, you know, some, you know, like I could stitch myself up like Rambo did or something like that. I mean,
fishing line out of your knife, and
right, and certainly that was, for me, that was not the case. That just meant I was probably a little bit more stubborn than the other guy, and would keep pushing. But that really, that culture, that was about a culture that you know, everyone expected you to show up and do the right thing for the right reasons, and not let your buddy down, and, you know, carry your weight. And I remember we had a winter warfare exercise where one of the guys, he was an older guy, and he, you know, God bless him, he made it through SF, and he blew his knee out on the landing in this winter warfare exercise, and this was in New Hampshire. And a winter warfare rucksack, we used, I think they called it the CFP 90, but it was a huge rucksack, and those things were heavy. And I was talking to one of my buddies, and he said he actually weighed his it was around 140 or 144 pounds. Can you imagine strapping one of those on?
And you weigh 170, 180.
Well, right. And because you've got, you know, all your, you know, water, food, hot gear, tent or part of a tent, you know, all that stuff for the mission, you know, radios, everything in there. I think we had snowshoes on ours, and but this guy blew his knee out, and he could barely walk. And so here we are on an exercise, and we have to treat this as real. And so you know, he was hitting himself with. He was a team medic too, so he was able to, you know, give himself something to get the pain down. And then we actually used we cut down saplings and made a stretcher, not to put him on it, but we put his rucksack on it, and he was kind of hobbling along while we were carrying that, you know, rucksack full of gear. It's just we were, you know, he couldn't show up because he blew his knee out, and everyone else had to pick up the slack, you know. So that's just part of that mindset. But I just I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying, oh, I was a Green Beret, you know what I mean? Because that gives a different picture of.
I mean, I've known you guys for a long time, and I had no idea. It's not like you're wearing a T-shirt that's.
Well, right. It almost seems I get a little bit. I feel a little bit guilty about it, like, you know, like I'm being a braggart or whatever, because I see these guys. You know, your buddy, the SEAL, that your Marine Recon guy, that Task Force 160 guy. I mean, just those guys.
But none of those guys. They're all like you. None of them. The first time Ryan the SEAL came in, I call him BTF Ryan, Big Tough Frog Man. That's how he's in my phone. And the first time he came into my gym, and we had met in jiu-jitsu class, and he's a SEAL. He's a big, you know, good-looking, tattoos everywhere.
Right.
He comes in and he's like, hey, don't tell anyone I was a SEAL. And I said, no problem. It's your business. This old lady, Katie, in her 60s, old lady. He walks in, puts his stuff down. She walks over to him and she goes, "Are you a SEAL?" And I heard her say that. I just started laughing. I go, "There goes your cover."
Yeah, right. You're blown. You're blown. Now it's time to escape and evade.
Right. How she knew that, I don't know, but that they're all like that. All you guys, I think there's a bit of humility to all of you because you've seen so many top level guys, and
Some of those guys were just, like I said, they were apex special. I mean, like maybe that Jocko Willink guy. And
he was the task unit commander for Ramadi. That's his claim to fame, is that when they took the city of Ramadi and they went building to building and just took the whole city back, he was the task unit commander for that.
That's just amazing stuff, man. Yeah, I mean, truly phenomenal people, and I really mean that when I say that. I feel very fortunate that I was able to run with those guys for the short period of time. And same thing in law enforcement. I was probably your middle of the road policeman, but I just had an opportunity to deal with a lot of great guys there too. Really experienced, all different kinds of police operations, and I feel very fortunate to have been able to work with guys like that.
Yeah.
There's tons of stories I could tell you probably about law enforcement, but maybe another 10 years.
Yeah, you want to get away from it a little bit, for sure.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Some of those guys need to be dead first, the criminal side.
Well, yeah, it's just really interesting stuff, and just neat to have been like I said, just to have been a part of any of that stuff.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and I would love to do this again sometime, and maybe we'll get together with Ryan from the 160th and BTF Ryan and do some kind of group podcast or something.
Well, I got to tell you, I have a friend of mine who did 26 years in special ops.
You were telling me he's on the Carolinas, right?
Yep, and super good guy. Definitely has that Cold War mindset, like I don't want anyone to know who I am and what I'm doing, and so he's very, really, at this point, I don't know if he's interested in doing it or not, but he has got a wealth of experience, a wealth of stories. He served in pretty much every, area of operations, mountainous, jungle, desert, and just been on a lot of interesting things and operations. And he's got combat experience from Panama. And he finished out his career overseas in the sandbox, And so if you could get him on, man, if you're able to stay on his military career, boy, does he have a lot of good stories.
Well, we're rolling through the Carolinas in September, so maybe he'll hear this podcast and see that it's not an ambush.
Right. No, I don't think it is at all, but it's just, honestly, I was... I told Lisa, I said, geez, I still really don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if I'm, able to tell a decent story
Before the story you told me, maybe we should go into that just a little bit before we finish, because that was the thing that I don't know if you're even supposed to talk about it or.
Well, no, I looked it up. It's online. They don't use it anymore.
Okay.
So all this information is easily accessed online. It's on Wikipedia and all that stuff. But yes, right before I got out, they designated my team to carry a backpack nuke, and they used it as, I don't know, as kind of I don't know how they, maybe to plug a hole in their strategic plan for in case the Soviets rolled across Europe. But I think that weapon has since been removed from the inventory.
Right.
But it was a backpack nuke, and we were supposed to infiltrate, put it on a target, and pull security on it, so no one messed with it, and escape and evade before it went off. But I mean, that was a one-way trip. And that was right before they designated my team to do that, about 3 months before I left. And I left actually early. They were starting to draw down the military with the Graham-Rudman Act, so I'd never done any training on it. I'd never seen it. All I know that right at that time, hey, you guys are going to be the special team, the glow-in-the-dark team, and
glow-in-the-dark team.
Right. They had a name for it. I can't remember what the team designation was. each special forces company has some specialties. Like your buddy in the SEALs probably is a free fall parachutist and a scuba diver and a scout swimmer and all that stuff. They kind of broke that up back then in SF, and so you had a scuba team, and that, you had a scout swim team, or what's called MAROPS, Maritime Operations Team. You had a Halo team, and I was on a Halo team, military.
High altitude, low.
That's correct. Yep. And then so maybe they gave that munition to the Halo team because they thought we were better at
Sure.
we were able to get it in easier.
Yeah.
I don't know. But they were going to go down somewhere down south to train on the tactics and the munition, and I got out due to the Graham-Rudman Act. They got me out 3 months early.
Yeah.
So, but it's not anything I ever wanted to be involved with ever.
Yeah. But it was funny that, and what you said to me is literally, I knew it was going to be a good podcast because every time I've talked to anyone and they've said, I don't think I'm very interesting, I don't think you're going to want me on here, it's always been great. It's always like a telltale sign. I'm like, all right, this is going to be good.
Well,
and that was the story you told me in the 5-minute phone call. Well, did you ever hear of that? And I was like, well, I'd heard of that, but I didn't think it was a real thing. And
yeah, if you type that in, I don't even remember what the designator for it. Every military thing has its nomenclature, sure. But if you do a search on that, there's multiple articles on the internet about it. It's even in Wikipedia, and they tell about I think they called the teams green light teams or whatever. I'm not even sure. I can't even remember what they called them. But and I was talking to my buddy down in North Carolina. He says, "Man, you better see, before you mention that to anyone, you might want to check and see if that info's out there yet." Yeah. And it is. It's all over the internet, and they say they don't use it anymore. I think it was developed in the early 50s. That particular.
I had first heard about it on Dan Carlin's podcast, and Dan Carlin does this incredible podcast called History on Fire, and it's just amazing. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but one of the podcasts, I'm trying to remember. I can't remember the name of the podcast itself that he did. He names all this series of podcasts, but it was on the Cold War, and that was one of the things they mentioned on it was that they had that, and they were looking for all different ways to
sneak that in there. Yeah. Just another trick in their trick bag for if the Soviets rolled over Western Europe, back then. It's
Destroyer of Worlds was the name of that podcast. I knew it would come to me.
Right. Who said that? Was that Oppenheimer?
Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
That speech was incredible.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
I've become death, the destroyer of worlds or something from the Bhagavad Gita.
So, to give you like how life kind of connects the dots. I was born in Los Alamos, New Mexico.
Really?
My dad was at an air base out there, and he met my mom. And my mom was out there because my grandpa, her father, who has since passed away, worked at the plant that developed the nuclear bomb. Yeah. And I don't know what his job was. I know he was a merchant marine, and he was in the merchant marine in World War II, but he actually worked in that plant or on that facility doing something. I don't know what, but that's where Mom met Dad, and that's where I was born, Los Alamos, New Mexico.
Full circle.
Yeah. It's funny. I was talking to my buddy who was down in South Carolina, trying to remember this stuff, because when you asked me to come on, I'm like, what can I remember? About 3 things, and we talked, and as we talked, he would mention something which would trigger 3 or 4 memories, and I would bring those up, and he would, it would trigger 3 or 4 in him, and we had a good couple hour-long conversation. And one thing I really wanted to tell you was when we were in first phase Special Forces, even if you had a guy who could make it through all the gates that they set up, all the portals that you had to pass through, all these tests or whatever, that didn't guarantee you a slot in Special Forces. Because I remember there was a guy that nobody liked. This guy was, definitely kind of for himself.
Right.
And he was not a team player, and it was not anyone that you wanted to work with when you got into the teams. And he was kind of universally disliked. And I remember the last phase I went through, the last section of training in first phase. Remember, we had land nav, survival, and patrolling. I did it in that order. Land nav, survival, and patrolling was my last section of the first phase. And on patrolling, one of the rangers, who was an experienced soldier, suggested we carry a little bit less food because it would be less weight in the rucks. We'd be a little bit more mobile. We were trying to limit our weight so we could get around easier. And toward the end of that operation, everyone was running out of food. And so this ranger says, pretty much all of us were out of food. We had a couple days left, and this ranger's like, "Hey, someone stole food out of my rucksack. Someone stole food."
Yeah.
And he goes to the instructors were called TACs, trainers, advisors, and counselors, and he brought that to the TAC. He said, "Hey, somebody stole food out of my rucksack, and I know what it is because I marked my cans," or whatever. How he was able to identify it. And the TACs called us online, called the patrol online, and drop your gear and go stand over there. And they searched everybody's ruck, and they found the food in this guy's ruck. And I'm like, what a piece of garbage, I mean, how, in addition,
you want to be part of a team,
right? In addition to everyone, not liking him and all the things he was doing, now he's stealing food from us, universal sin. And I think they called it an honor code violation, but he was gone that day.
Yeah.
I later found out that was engineered by somebody.
No shit.
To get rid of that guy, and as a young kid, it blew my mind.
Yeah.
Now, that's what I was told. I don't know if that was real or not, but I heard from several folks that was engineered by somebody. Because nobody would have wanted to work with him in the teams anyhow.
But it's a way of getting rid of the deadwood one way or another.
He was making it through all the, he was performing. Yep. He was making all the standards, but he was not a team player, and he was not someone who you'd want to be with on the teams. And they got rid of him, man. And that's really blew my mind. It's again another reinforcing factor, like show up. You know what I mean?
Right.
Show up, be part of the team, take care of your buddies, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So.
That's that's fantastic. It's fantastic because you're putting yourself in these dire situations. They could come. You have to be able to depend on every single member of that unit. And if there's someone there that the guys just don't have the right feel for, they're not going to trust.
Well, and that's kind of a downer story, but the upside, another food story, because like your buddy Ryan was saying, you're fighting for calories, and they take away calories and sleep from you, and then just run you through all these ringers. But I remember I ran out of food on a patrol, and a guy who I'd been with through basic and airborne school, and him and I, we did not see eye to eye. It was just one of those guys you naturally just don't get along with. And we always seemed to be bumping heads. And, we took a chow break. We were on this patrol, and I don't know, I remember it was the middle of the day, but everyone was kind of sitting on their rucksack and having that last sea ration or whatever they saved. And he asked me, he said, "Well, how come you're not breaking out a sea rat?" And I said, "Well, because I ran out. I was a glutton. I ate them all in the beginning,
right.
And he reached into his rucksack, and he would have had enough to had 2 cans of food that day. And what he did was he grabbed his last can of food and tossed it to me. And this is a guy, again, I didn't get along with. I didn't care for him very well, and he was giving up what could have been his something to get him over the edge. It was a fruit cocktail in an olive drab can. And never did I feel so ashamed that I was such a glutton that I ate all my food, or so happy, or so thankful, I guess is a better word.
It's a lesson learned too, right?
Man, that's the big lesson that I learned right there, that even though this guy, we were not on the same page, he was willing to give up something that was incredibly important to him, to me. And that's still, now that I'm older, that brings tears to my eyes. But I mean, I still remember how I felt that day. Yeah. And I thought, man, what, even though I didn't care for the guy, I thought to myself, what a good dude, you know?
That's a great lesson for everybody. Let's end on that one.
All right.
Thank you for coming on the show. I definitely would like to do this again sometime, and give my best to Lisa. And
I will. Yeah, good talking to you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
This has been The Refined Savage. See ya.